Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a place so small. Its land area is less than 30 square kilometers, scattered across this huge ocean zone, almost 30,000 times its size.
Yeah.
A nation in the vast Pacific, often known to the world primarily as, the poster child for climate change vulnerability.
You're right, that's the common image.
But diving into this stack of articles, research, notes you've shared,
Yeah.
it reveals a story of Tuvalu that is, well, profoundly more complex and fascinating than just the headlines.
Absolutely. Our mission in this deep dive is really to go beyond that single narrative and explore the full, rich history and reality of this tiny nation, strictly through the lens of the material you've provided us with.
And right away, some incredibly intriguing nuggets just pop out from these sources. Tuvalu is one of the smallest independent nations by population, just around 11 or 12,000 people. It's also listed as one of the least visited countries on Earth, just after Vatican City. Talk about isolation shaping destiny.
That isolation is absolutely key. But what's truly fascinating and maybe a bit counterintuitive to that climate risk narrative
is that one source notes that while it's known for being on the brink, some islands, even low-lying Funafuti, have actually been found stable or even growing.
Really? Growing?
Yeah, due to natural geological processes like calcareous sediment formation. Though the source is quick to add, they are still highly susceptible in the future.
Oh, okay.
That duality, resilience meeting this existential threat, it's a fundamental tension you see running through this material.
It really is. And this detail about their historical perspective, the sources say oral tradition, expressed in chanting, is considered more correct than written history there. How does that reshape how you understand things?
It completely grounds their identity in history in a way that prioritizes lived, shared experience over, say, documented records. It's a very different perspective from typical Western historical approaches.
So over the next while, we're going to journey through Tuvalu's physical reality, its ancient roots, unique culture, the often turbulent path it took to independence.
The economic tightropes it walks, its distinct political landscape, and yes, the profound environmental challenges weaving together everything we found in the sources you've given us.
Great. Let's begin by setting the physical stage and looking at its deep past.
Okay. Diving into the geography, these sources describe Tuvalu as 8 islands, 7 atolls, and 1 coral island spread over an almost unimaginable ocean area.
Yeah, the scale difference is staggering.
A 750,000 square kilometer exclusive economic zone compared to a minuscule 26 square kilometers of land.
And that tiny amount of land is stretched out over 600 kilometers north to south.
Which puts it midway between Hawaii and Australia, emphasizing its significant isolation, not just from continents, but even from closer neighbors like Fiji, Samoa, Kiribati.
Exactly. And the nearest international airport on the capital Funafuti is a remarkable 1,127 kilometers away. That distance is just a constant factor.
Climate-wise, it's warm and humid year-round, averaging 28 to 30 degrees Celsius, gets about 3,000 millimeters of rain, mostly in the wet season, notes to March.
And the sources highlight El Niño periods can bring punishing drought, water shortages, crop failures. It's a serious issue.
Right. And while destructive storms aren't common historically, high seas did cause serious damage back in late 97, 98.
Geologically, it's relatively young. Country-wise, the atolls formed in the last 3 million years. What's really fascinating about its geological history, as presented here, is this mention of islands emerging and resubmerging over millennia based on shifting sea levels and tectonic movement. Appearing 130,000 years ago, gone 125,000 years ago.
Wow.
And the modern atoll itself is constantly moving, tracking northwest and east at about 5 centimeters per year.
That slow, constant geological dance is definitely a powerful backdrop to their modern story, isn't it?
It really is.
Moving to early history, the sources presume Polynesian settlers arrived about 300 to 500 years ago, possibly through complex westward or eastward migrations.
But finding clear early accounts in Polynesian history traditions is noted as difficult, which again makes that reliance on oral traditions so significant.
Right. And archaeology, according to these sources, hasn't actually found evidence of prehistoric settled islands locally.
The early settlement patterns described are insightful, though. Individual islands settled over time, initially small band settlements near fishing grounds, then shifting to larger groups focused on lagoonal fishing. Even the challenge of crowded spaces for small watercraft is mentioned, giving you a glimpse into their early life.
And they have rich emergence traditions and legends. The tale of Samisi and the disappearance of the Tabatues is one example given.
Right, and settlements like Nukunonu and Kioa are said to have derived from the Elisi Islands. It truly underscores the deep roots of their oral history and how it informs their identity.
Exactly. Their origins are intrinsically linked to these narratives. Which brings us to the moment their isolated world began to, well, intersect with outsiders.
European contact started appearing on charts relatively early. Pedro Fernão de Queiroz spotted some islands in 1606.
Even before that, 1595, Álvaro de Mendaña de Neira charted Funafuti and Nanumanga, notably with direct assistance from islanders themselves.
That detail, islander assistance early on, is telling. The sources suggest this initial trade contact influenced social structures, ideologies, led to increased wealth among chief traders.
Yeah. And Polynesian goods like bark cloth and pandanus leaf mats began circulating outwards.
And the islanders weren't just passive recipients. Despite their isolation, Tuvaluans proactively sought contact with Americans, Japanese, Europeans in the mid-19th century.
Right. The first visits mentioned are American whaling ships in the late 1830s seeking water and fruit, and they were welcomed by large native boats.
Then later, merchant ships came looking for copra.
This exchange was more than just transactional, wasn't it? Ships supplied European items, but also, importantly, shared knowledge of the outside world.
Definitely. The sources even mention how native people from other islands like Niue, Fiji, Tokelau were brought in with their trade items, expanding the islanders' perspective.
The beginning of the colonial era is noted in the sources as being recorded by a Spanish explorer in the late 1560s. Over the next 50 years, different European powers claimed uninhabited islands.
But the sources emphasize a crucial point. Throughout this, islander culture largely persisted, retaining old folkways.
British involvement solidified later. Few settlers initially, but the British established a hold in the 1890s with a British settlement trust government on Funafuti.
And the sources explicitly linked this to a fear of German annexation, prompting the British occupation of Funafuti as a strategic point.
The UK formally took control July 28, 1892, declaring a protectorate. Concerns about Germany potentially taking other areas like Tuvalu, Samoa, apparently spurred a British show of force from Fiji in August 92.
Yes, the sources describe a proclamation reading ceremony and the island being securely occupied.
What's particularly striking is the source's reflection on the nature of this specific colonial action.
How so?
Well, the historian quoted is puzzled, wondering if the colonizers fully understood their own actions. They describe that 1892 incident as outrageous and coercive, even amounting to terror upon an isolated group.
Wow.
Contrasting it sharply with treaties that might coerce after agreement.
That's a powerful indictment drawn directly from the material. From 1892 onwards, under the British Protectorate, a formal treaty was signed. British effectively took over from a failed commercial enterprise.
And alarmingly, the sources mention the seizure of the phosphate island Banaba for exploitation, stating it occurred despite a treaty with its king.
Right, and the 1892 treaty explicitly placed all decisions under the responsibility of the British Empire.
Which further entangled islanders in the global economy by requiring reasonable payment for land. The sources call this entry into the international arena troublesome and complicated, noting that modernity trade, guns, liquor, church, wages arrived heavily armed. That phrase really sticks with you.
It does. The administration structure was imposed via a British order in council, prohibiting changing island law without the Fiji governor's approval. Taxation was introduced,
which the sources state undermined existing governance, like chiefly authority.
Exactly. And this created a notable power struggle between the church, seen as better versed in culture, tied to the populace and the state, which controlled wages and imports.
Interesting dynamic. Both were concerned with retaining identity and sovereignty, but their methods and priorities for governance were contested.
And stability, lessening conflict only came later, from 1938, with increased Australian control, new institutions, monetary reserves, and island enterprise.
Then, unexpectedly, World War II drew Tuvalu into the global conflict.
Right. The Japanese attack on Niue on March 30th, 1942, was the only aerial assault on what the source calls Elizabeth Atoll, causing significant worry. Japanese forces were advancing in the Southwest Pacific.
So the U.S. and British strategy became one of cutting off this invasion, placing naval forces attacking Japanese outposts in the Gilbert Islands in 43-44.
And Tuvalu geographically became crucial, a key island group to prevent attacks and Japanese entry into the mid-South Pacific. Vatupu, Hawara, Funafuti Islands were used as advanced watch stations.
Heavy bombing, especially on Vaitupu and Funafuti in 1943. The sources even include a curious detail about disarmed Japanese warplanes intended for bomber construction. though the specifics are a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, that is an odd detail. Post-war brought significant changes, driven by the new global slogan of decolonization. Britain indicated intentions for administrative shifts in 1945.
Investigation visits followed in 46, leading to a British colonial office white paper critical of the former admin proposing changes.
Interestingly, the sources mention other colonial powers, like France, were unhappy with these plans.
There was also a recognized need for outside assistance for development sought from America and Canada.
And the sources mention New Zealand being accepted as a trustee in 1947, adding a note that it was considered an uninhabited territory under NZ trusteeship since then, which, as you said, seems contradictory, but it's in the source material.
Right. This era saw the self-government process begin, noted here as starting around 1975.
Which clearly marks the beginning of their determined push toward self-determination.
Yes, and the sources detailed the significant division of the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. Divided over constitutional matters, complaints about London, leading to a formal split in 1975.
And the Ellice Islands then became a separate British protectorate, officially named Tuvalu.
This separation was the crucial step, setting the foundation for independence.
Exactly. Earlier British treaties giving protectorate status allowed for a more gradual letting go of influence, permitting Tuvalu to begin establishing its own institutions, currency, police, customs, telecom body.
The steps towards full nationhood followed swiftly. A government formed after the colony dissolved, first parliamentary elections late 1975, described as forming a tense government.
And frustration with the pace of British action reportedly led to a pro-independence nationalist government forming, driven by non-European parties. The Tuvalu Independence Party won those first elections, Aflipita mentioned as the first PM.
The idea of referendums on independence was widely discussed publicly. Limited pre-referendum publicity from British aid, but scheduling was keenly anticipated. Sources report substantial public interest and concern on referendum days.
Now here's where the source material presents a bit of a puzzle regarding dates, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
One passage states the outcome was full independence gained October 1st of the same year, implying 1975 from the flow.
Right, but that directly contradicts other dates given later in the sources that point to 1978.
Exactly. We'll have to keep flagging these inconsistencies as they appear in the material. In that 1975 account, Tuvalu was proclaimed self-governing, independent, unitary parliamentary government.
And the sources highlight the first postage stamps moving away from the Queen's image were modest but politically very effective. A clear symbol of sovereignty and capability.
Let's add a bit more background from the sources on the formation of the larger Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. British interest increased early 19th C, abolition of slavery, more ships.
First British warships, 1827. Exploration led to a protectorate declaration, 1857, covering a wider area. Settlements on Ocean Island, Tarawa.
And the perceived danger of German annexation reportedly spurred the declaration of the islands as a British protectorate in 1888.
A protectorate treaty signed with the King of the Ellice Islands, Funafuti specifically declared a protectorate. Banaba annexed later, 1900.
The Ellice Islands remained virtually unoccupied by Europeans until the late 19th century, despite German warships exploring in 1875, 1895, 1899.
Right. As noted earlier, late 1892, British warships in Funafuti Lagoon commander offered the king a flag, accepted. British rule fell described again as a nominal term.
Intensive missionary work began then. British merchant ship actions in the Gilbert Islands in 1892 further solidified their perceived possession.
And the sources mention the islands had gained trade and population from various regions since 1878. A fishing village at Nikunau saw trade flourish.
Adding another piece to the referendum timeline puzzle, one passage states January 1st, 1976, Tuvalu was officially handed over to the British again, potentially conflicting with that 1975 split date.
Right. New Governor General arrived in Funafuti, atmosphere of great expectations, anxiety, even fireworks greeting the new year in Funafuti before Tarawa.
The day marked by government programs, new songs, speeches, prayers, basic questions asked. Who made this dream come true? What did it mean? What now?
And the answers, as presented, indicated people would rule their island, new elected council with British law powers, parliamentary elections needed for first self-governing government.
Serious questions needed sorting, but the sources emphasized the most important immediate step was a referendum to decide on independence.
And the recommendation for that referendum came from the Constitutional Conference in London, March 4, 1974. Representatives from Tarawa and Funafuti attended.
New constitution draft needed one more negotiation stage. Many matters needed detailed definition. And a 1976 independence date was even settled on at this stage adding yet another potential date point to our timeline confusion.
Yeah, it's definitely not straightforward in the sources. They decided to approach via renegotiation versus legislation to not jeopardize independence.
So yes, the material you've given us presents a slightly complex, sometimes contradictory timeline for the final steps towards independence, with mentions of 75, 76, and 78 as key moments.
It really highlights the challenge of pinning down precise dates when drawing from multiple accounts. Moving forward, let's look at the reality of nationhood once it was broadly achieved.
According to what seems to be the most consistently cited date in the sources, aspirations turned reality October 1st, 1978. Official independence.
The local name, Tuvalu, sacred land, was considered, but ultimately the country became known as Tuvalu, name of one island group.
And the sources note the naming process involved legal experts, but also tremendous Tuvaluan work, formulating the language of independence. Tuvalu means 8, suggested to help develop national identity across the 8 islands.
Although, as we noted earlier, the source also mentions 9 islands elsewhere. A small discrepancy there.
Right. The sources emphasize the importance of the Tuvaluan context in achieving independence. They note it's often assumed outsiders are indifferent to the significance, but the material strongly contradicts this, highlighting extensive preparation, public discussion, teaching. The preparation and event were central.
First government established October 1st, 1978. Described as a complex period, new, independent, initially limited means. Yet a sophisticated framework of legislation, sovereignty, tradition was created, and the government noted as functioning satisfactorily.
Components seen as essential were things like newspapers, broadcasting, police, even armed forces ideas shaping their early structure.
Discussion groups, informal gatherings, meetings, correspondence, highlighted as forming the basis for community understanding. Much time and discussion genuinely devoted to understanding independence and government.
Much had to be explained, taught, developed. Tuvaluans described as proactive, creative in establishing their first government. Preparations finalized, government opened, immediate new developments began with a new generation of Tuvaluan employees.
Revisiting official independence. Initially broached by Funafuti leaders in the early 1960s, little enthusiasm at first.
Key moment. UN Committee on Non-Self-Governing Territories visited in 1976. Optimism high, curiosity about Tuvaluans' capabilities.
However, the UN conclusion was notable. Independence not until sufficient manpower to run government services, stating a danger of running before learning to walk.
And the sources mentioned the Tuvaluan position at that meeting questioned if this stance automatically denied them independence.
Then the sources describe a shift in attitude within the government of the day, discussing independence more seriously. Initially disregarded as fanciful, the idea gained credence, agreed in principle.
Elements of self-government discussed in meetings. New names suggested. Tuvalu gained popularity, formally submitted to UN debate over Ellis Islands.
Ideas of retaining union with UKNZ after independence rejected, perceived hostile countries limited, mainly Soviet Union. Any Tuvaluan group fighting independence unlikely to gain foreign support.
The final push. 5th Independence Conference of 17-19-1978. Delegates arriving prior. Sources mention 50 host delegates, plus heads from Nauru and Tuvalu again. Slightly odd if Tuvalu was host, but that's how it's presented.
Discussions passed quickly, cooperation support from other countries. Unfinished work completed at Second Assistance Conference. Shortly after, government took practical steps like purchasing passenger connections to Fiji. Foreign aid deemed necessary, generously met by the region.
The formal proclamation, as detailed in one passage, Thursday, September 28, 1978, Felefono, Funafuti. Just before October 1st adds another layer to the timing.
Right. Name change formally proclaimed. Queen, represented by Sir Jonathan Huntingford. Malietoa Tanumafili II of Western Samoa attended. Same day, first local parliament elected. Independence proclaimed within Commonwealth realm, subject to British monarch via Governor-General.
Regarding the first government, building a new system, Western parliamentary democracy model, major task. British officials provided first constitution draft. Negotiations in Suva, Fiji, described as shrouded in secrecy.
Final document, 6 acts, not presented to all MPs until endorsement meeting. Passed with efforts from members like Malika Matera.
Now here's another date conflict. Sources state constitution came into force July 1st, 1983, and first government sworn in same day.
Which clearly conflicts with the earlier 1978 establishment and election dates mentioned, so we have multiple potential timelines for the initial government's formal start based on this material.
Exactly. The government reportedly comprised the same ministers as before, formed between June 8, July 28, sworn in July, October.
Challenges in structure included colonial pressure requiring islands' council's chairmen to become ministers. Cabinet comprised 7 members, 4 council chars as ministers, 2 Funafuti members, education, health, port.
One individual, Tong, reportedly secured portfolios like Funafuti fisheries, women's affairs, local gov to balance powers, a move the source calls a great oversight, suggesting it made it easier to fool others.
To protract decisions, government met only Wednesdays, comprised PM, and only ministers for education, health, others were advisors.
This unusual structure reportedly led to a perception of 2 governments operating, one on islands under Tong, based on early networks, second in Funafuti under Nash, called Great Opportunist by Milika, Sheengate.
Opposition dissent reportedly policed, government described as ruling with impunity. Tom's perceived inability to decide meant weekly cabinet meetings sometimes became social gatherings. Food, drinks, national anthem.
And this period is described with striking contrast. One perspective calls it the Golden Age, no bills raised, implying lack of harmful legislation. Another calls it Galloping Ites Tokolo, implying the chief sleeps while landswaters disappear, highlighting deeply conflicting views on that initial period's effectiveness.
That certainly paints a vivid, if somewhat chaotic, picture of the early days. Let's shift focus now to the heart of Tuvaluan identity, its cultural heritage, which the sources detail extensively.
Yes, the sources emphasize the richness derived from traditional knowledge and practices. Food, clothing, dance, still actively practiced, crucial for identity.
And despite pressures, globalization, social media, tech, many traditional practices remain remarkably unchanged. People bask in the presence of culture daily through songs, folktales, food prep. Events celebrate traditions year-round.
Specific expressions highlighted through food prep and dancing. Traditional food varies by island, but consistently requires long, effortful prep, coconut products key. Offered at community events, families praise, thank God.
Traditional dances, sometimes led by the wisest men, Anto, performed with deep stories behind the songs, showcasing singing, originality, creativity.
Cultural transmission vital, starts young. Taught pride and heritage, those sources acknowledge modern tech environment make it harder to practice some things. Still remembered at family gatherings, performances, community celebrations.
Language and identity perhaps most acutely intertwined. Very strong sense of identity based on collective identity of people speaking same language. Language, fundamental part of heritage, frames reality, unites people despite minor differences.
But there's a significant challenge noted. Decrease in Tuvalu language use, English becoming majority first language, mainly due to education system.
Reportedly worsened by what sources call supranationalism of English. The attitude it's inherently superior plus Western media exposure, sometimes negative experiences speaking Tuvaluan.
Conservation efforts are underway, national awareness campaign on language culture. Success depends on people's commitment.
Diving deeper into traditional practices, distinctive knowledge, beliefs, ways of life passed down through grueling, sometimes dangerous experiences. Environment biology shape culture deeply. Egalitarian education ensures common ground of info experience. Key practices: gastronomy, dressmaking, fishing, ceremonial events.
Gastronomy described as display of devotion. Customs upheld in food prep, taro, breadfruit, fish. Feasts for significant events, weddings, feature rare items prepared collectively as family offerings.
Alcohol, chewing iser leaves served collectively, accompanied by dance, song, chanting, girl dancers only, or male-female combo. Importance maintained in ceremonial gift presentation, family cultural. Artistic decorations elaborate, egalitarian, comprehensive. Festivals, funerals, weddings have specific requirements. Gift protocols, materials, decoration.
Traditional dress resembles NZ style, Western clothes plus hip skirt sarong, often woven garments. Women's ceremonial bazaars offer dresses, personal group styles, other dressings, fragrance, warray clinging, ceremonial tattoos.
Traditional fishing described as egalitarian, free from obligations, sustained by observances, variety of traps lures. Tuvaluans viewed colonial shifts to inanimate fisheries development with circumspection.
Fishing knowledge presented as complex, comprehensive, yielded by painstaking experience, vulnerable to environmental change, pollution overfishing, includes details like best coral for traps, buoy weights, texture influence on marine life, lunar cycle impact.
Infrequent ceremonial diving balances pride and catch with caution, includes chants, knowledge transfers, tools, offerings, divinity concession discussions.
Alarmingly, sources note Tuvaluans aggressively exploit ocean areas, raising concern outer atolls might face future desertion, partly because of this.
Dances, songs, chants, sometimes led by Antelo, widely disseminated with distinctive variants. Melody often slow beat, stress on fifth note. Dance, song, chant, closely interrelated. Dancers imitate contemporaries' knowledge holders. Simple steps elaborate into complex movements formations, often at night, directed by audience participation.
Returning to language and identity depth. Tuvaluans share mother tongue, described as a cute issue of identity, crucial in nation-states, not based on single ethno-linguistic group.
Sources pose, who or what is Tuvalu? Answer, must commence with language. Those who speak Tuvaluan, if not, you are an outsider. Spatial constraint of small isles reinforces this.
Language structure itself reflects isolation, inter-island communication impact, dialectal cultural diversity, via vocalization of songs, chants, narratives, proverbs, meaning embedded in poetic formulae, hard to translate, orality extensive, inseparability of speech key cultural systems intimate.
Literacy introduced relatively early, but no comparable written artistic knowledge reproduction. Learned paradox often expressed orally. Preeminent performance tradition. Fagogo, sung in vernacular, accompanied by signs, mimetics, instruments. Sources even look at language structure, rhythm, tone, word choice to show how it carries memory, builds social relationships, embodies cultural ideology. Goes beyond simple communication.
That level of detail truly underscores how culture isn't just something they do, but embedded in their very way of speaking. Let's turn now to economic development and the challenges there.
Okay. Government's top priorities, when assessing projects, explicitly stated: blue economy, sustainable ocean resources, and climate change adaptation mitigation measures.
Challenges like water pollution, land-based sewage, traditionally managed by large community groups, still serious. Addressed informally by community health program using female traditional health personnel.
The recent pandemic severely impacted the economy. Significant loss of overseas tourism hospitality jobs many relied on. Aid received helped cushion some blows.
Telecommunications refurbishment has progressed, critical for outer island contact government services, health info, environmental monitoring.
A really critical piece mentioned is the shark cable, currently Tuvalu's only connection to the outside world after a previous cable failed.
Wow, only one.
Yep. Government schools rely on slow satellite internet as backup. Over half POP have mobiles, but services like WhatsApp unavailable. Plan for mobile broadband mid-2020s. Sources note past investments, like vessels, lacked relevance. Software industry proposed 2013.
Despite these challenges, sources indicate economic growth occurred over the last 3 years. Steady rise, 3% GDP per capita, driven primarily by maritime zone income, presumably fishing licenses, and remittances from overseas workers.
Agriculture and fishing remain important for subsistence livelihoods, but small contribution to overall GDP. Development prospects seen focusing on protecting asset services related to climate adaptation mitigation, promoting managing tourism carefully, strengthening education sector.
Government economic objectives listed include strengthening analysis forecasting, consolidating revenue, preparing reviewing financial framework, developing monitoring for public entities enterprise policy, reviewing land use fees, extending donor-gov contingent fund contributions, enhancing Tuvalu trust fund management.
Reaffirming agriculture fishing contribution, less than 3% GDP past decade. Sustainable coconut cash crop industry not significantly developed. Practical environmental constraints. EEZ fishing largely undeveloped by Tuvaluans. Domestic fishing, 2% GDP. Subsistence agriculture. Coconuts, pulaka, taro, sweet potato, veg, supplemented by fishing. Fish consumption highly valued, embedded in custom culture. Fishing grounds, vital community resource, shared based on past decisions. Agriculture limited by small islands, lack of reliable fresh water, dependent on imported staples, crops grown. Copra, taro, breadfruit, bananas, veg, mostly communal production. Commercial efforts, some palm planting, coconut oil, pumice stone quarry.
Expanding on fishing. Potential for fish export, human-animal consumption. Islanders good swimmers, catch yields unreliable. As mentioned, aggressively exploit ocean areas. Concern about future desertion of outer atolls, partly due to this.
Catch value quantified differently. Subsistence first above. Tuna export attempts. Untapped ocean forest mentioned. Distant fishing for marlin. Dive sites at shallow coral formations abundant. Potential for tourism. Fishing, snorkeling.
But sources note Tuvalu currently ill-prepared. Needs training. Setting aside conservation areas before developing tourism further. Other fishing, squid lobsters unreliable. Sea turtles rarely caught. Vertic exploitation decreasing populations. Primary animal production insignificant during fish processing development phase.
The tourism industry sees growing interest despite size or remoteness. Unspoiled islands, different experience. Mainly European visitors, adventure, rare lifestyle, authenticity preserved by isolation pop size. Low-budget backpacking limited?
Market. Visitation passports ticket confirmed accommodation. 30-day visas on arrival. Escorted group tours increasing. Waitlisted visitors increasing. Arrivals by air still relatively low. Under 800 annually, one source, mostly via Fiji.
Catering for these small numbers is a challenge. Resources concentrated on 2 main islands. Accommodation ratio noted as very low. One source confusingly states, 1 hotel, 20 beds for Abigail 20 annual visitors. Probably means 20 at a time, but key point. Ratio bed store is very low, 0.2.
High-demand principal hotels rely on unproven centralized control. Success of foreign-funded hotel purchase renovation unknown. Need ecologically benign tourism. Low cumulative numbers impact shorter concerns now.
But overdevelopment over exploitation seen as more immediate issues to address before Tuvalu becomes more reliant on tourism as major sector.
This economic snapshot highlights reliance on external factors like aid remittances, cautious approach needed for developing potential sectors like tourism, all happening against the backdrop of their primary existential vulnerability.
The main threat, as widely known, is this low-lying island nation is existentially threatened by climate change, particularly rising sea levels.
And here again, we see that significant, fascinating conflict in the source material, widely considered at risk of drowning, as you'd expect. However, one source explicitly notes scientific findings show all islands, including low-lying Funafuti, have been found stable or even growing due to natural geological processes like sediment formation.
Right, that resilience point is there.
Yet, immediately after stating this, the sources reaffirm they are still highly susceptible in the future. This duality current geological stability meeting predicted existential threat is a central point presented.
Despite that note of natural resilience, the overall picture painted is one of potential environmental catastrophe. Rising ocean temps, coral bleaching, ocean acidification, combined effects predicted disastrous for Tuvalu, implications for global community. Widely regarded as one of most at risk from climate change sea level rise, fueling claims it will become uninhabitable soon.
Tuvalu's response, deeply driven by this profound concern. Why they're active in international climate negotiations since COP 1995. Joined UN 1979 explicitly to advance climate interests globally.
Sources include a powerful quote. Because our livelihoods and country are at stake, we are absolutely committed to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and to working closely with other countries to bring the gains of science and technology to the disadvantage of developing countries like Tuvalu.
Climate change impacts create significant vulnerabilities, cannot meet developmental needs without international assistance. Continuous changes threaten lives, forcing preservation of unique culture and archives. A stark implication.
Specific impacts listed: sea level rise, fierce storms, extreme winds, coral bleaching, saltwater intrusion, drought, fuzzy rain patterns. Officially designated extreme risk. Damage across government infra, housing, food security, trade.
Salinized groundwater food systems. Adaptation to salt-tolerant crops needed. Changing weather impacts growing harvest seasons, productivity, pest weeds, crop resilience, food availability.
Some literature cited says Tuvalu must adapt, can't afford to leave or seek new habitats. Since unique culture language dance can only continue in historical settings, migration with dignity mooted as potential pathway.
Sources note increasing number of climate refugees wishing to settle USNZSE. Climate change fisheries loss, not well documented. Many disappear without sharing stories, highlights a gap in understanding human impact.
While most research focuses on high-level issues, sea level, heat, drought, the sources provided also consider direct consequences for fisheries, loss of traditional livelihoods, food security, wider negative effects on daily life.
Other problems listed. Tropical cyclones predicted more severe, destructive, less predictable. Increased severe El Niño cycles, heightened rainfall, more coral bleaching, negative ocean changes. Ocean acidification, immediate long-term threat to reefs. Urgent contention on greenhouse gas emissions, climate tempering solutions globally highlighted as essential.
Returning briefly to rising sea levels geology, sources contrast vast geological history, millions of years, limestone foundations from coral reefs, with recent, shorter human history. Archaeological evidence exists, much obscure. Atolls geologically young, 3 emirs, linked to Pacific hotspot eruption, emergence-submergence cycles.
Basaltic rocks weathered fertile red soil bauxite, fertile inland soiled forest. Silicate sediments eroded onto reef, coral colonization, lagoon building. Atoll height, 3-meter lagoon side, 5-meter landward. Tracking NWE at 5 Sidomir.
Contrasting theoretical versus modern sea levels. Theoretical, fossil reef static, historical levels from coastal indicators, modern levels not static predictable, natural and human error, Holocene rise exponential, allied to global pattern, deduction, Islands first inhabited by sea people 1,000 years ago.
Their global advocacy on climate is substantial, relentless. Since '99, Tuvalu, often with Kiribati, attending UNFCCC Kyoto negotiations, consistently focusing on plight of small, low-lying Pacific islands, specifically their own.
2002 delegation visited NZS, gained humanitarian assist, funding for climate change project Phase 2, meeting Australian PM highlighted.
Actively pursued advocacy, Europe, Japan, other countries, meeting scientists on Tuvalu's long-term fate, references to seeking legal opinions, visits by officials like NZ Attorney General.
Probing Japan's Global Warming Prevention HQ, inviting embassy environmental officers presenting reports video, attending Caribbean Disaster Management Conference, seeking media coverage, Japan, workshop on global warming coverage, member Alliance of Small Island States, AOCISA, since 1999, active participant.
It's very clear from the material. They're not passively waiting. They're actively, strategically engaging internationally to raise awareness and demand action.
Definitely. Transitioning now to social issues, which the sources show are deeply influenced by isolation and small population size.
The education system, guided by Ministry of Education, 4 main school types. Education compulsory, first 6 years, 12 years universal provided. Tuvaluan, first official language. Education bilingual, English Tuvaluan. Literacy, remarkably high, 98.6%.
System. 7-year primary, 3-year secondary, certificate-level tertiary, national exam success, inter-island half scholarship for regional unit certificate level, funded by national budget foreign aid.
7 primary schools, ministry, 3 secondary church, plus private schools, Funafuti Vaitupu. Large primary on main island, Funafuti, has degree-holding teachers. Outer island primary, small, 1 to 2 classes. Community built with gov help, run by novice aid teachers. Grade coverage varies, in-service training provided.
Secondary education. 10 public areas near primary schools. Tuition often by parish, late-night parish rooms with pastors. Materials similar to primary. Students with scores between thresholds attend. Option to drop out or take 2 years. Classes often continue rather than repeat if students willing. Learning dependent on student drive.
Literacy coverage in media noted as skewed. Gov broadcasts English, FM, cultural programs, Tuvalu, school facilities, library but no qualified librarians, teaching aides, office equipment, except desks.
Healthcare also faces critical challenges. Limited resources, isolation, land mass, socioeconomic factors, climate vulnerability. COVID-19 strained resources, supply chain issues, calls for international partnership support, full effects still determined. Gov commitment needed for forward-thinking, innovative solutions. Health Act vision. All Tuvaluans will live in a manner that promotes, protects, and supports health.
Reducing health risks seen as contributing significantly to increasing living standards, sustainable development. Needs identified. Mobilize policy community support for evidence-based local healthcare service committees. Identify reduce challenges. Tackling non-communicable diseases, NCDs. Bold priority shift. Advocating strains-based approach using community resources resilience.
Policy supporting food security, efficacy, preservation, traditional food medicines crucial for improving outcomes, encouraging cultural solutions, reviving identity. These policies plus continued support for existing priorities provide platform for neighbors to learn from Tuvalu's approach. Key factors for solutions: youth, leadership, local resource mobilization, balanced public health priorities, coupled with international networking for partnerships funding for workforce central health services. Overcoming capacity limits requires focus on awareness, communications, collaboration.
Current health services described as limited despite modern hospital, improved healthcare infra compared to past. Medical officer, epidemiologists. 15 essential drugs, new pharmacy testing service, strict food slaughtering regs, but local services inadequate for complex issues, patients to Fiji for special treatment, experts from Fiji for emergencies.
The sources touch on sensitive social issues, highlighting a fascinating clash between traditional custom and Western legal concepts. Sexual info STD education provided, schools, radio, TV, but strong reluctance to talk openly.
Laws often reflect colonial admin, vary greatly with social structure lifestyle, difficult to apply, cause resentment. Striking examples. Murder cases, culprit family relationships widely circulated personally, traditional compensation common preferred over fines, jails reportedly meaningless. Notes even say no adultery cases recorded, suggest distinct social legal logic at play.
That glimpse into their distinct legal social structure really underscores how deeply traditional systems remain influential, even alongside formal laws. Let's bring our focus now to modern Tuvalu and how it navigates the 21st century.
Modern Tuvalu continues demographic transitions. Birth rate 4.8, 2020, plop 10K 1960s, now 12K, Density 445 square kilometers, and Tuvalu relocating since 1950s. Harsh conditions, but strong attachment to homeland despite migration history.
International initiatives like Pacific Adaptation Strategy Assistance Program, PACSP assisted, recognize lack of policy relevance for climate risks in coastal low-lying nations, highlighting specific challenges. Financial safety nets, remittances from greater economies, AOSNZ, crucial insurance against climate disaster.
Resettlement discussions ongoing. Sources mentioned resettlement agents contacted about Gov Action Plan, referral to other states, expected reactions, human rights defenders, climate scientists. As of 2018, Gov operated limited capacity, focused on migration with dignity for future generations.
Stated intention per sources: keep land, integrate Tuvaluans into new homes elsewhere, pending artificial islands or finding ways to attach water levels.
Telecommunications history over 100 years, previous cable infra. As noted, tangent cable failed, shark cable only link currently. Gov schools rely on slow satellite backup. Half-pop mobiles, WhatsApp unavailable. Mid-2020s mobile broadband plan. Sources note past investments lacked relevance. Genealogy 2004, software proposal 2013.
Current demographics: HGI 0.624, 110th 188 2016, GNI 146th, medium human development, access basic services good, Gov largest employer, literacy high 100%, small student numbers, education structure, early childhood, primary, secondary, commitment-free compulsory equity post-secondary.
Cultural changes occurred, notably after First Missionary 1890 Western Christian intro. But sources emphasize no widespread cultural disruption. Most traditions retain, majority church members. Continuous change driven by mix. Pop growth, economic shifts, cultural environmental changes, crucial for planning.
Pop growth details July 2017, Pop 11.8K up from 11.1K 2012, AG annual growth 1.1%, male-female ratio 1.1, 1 in 3, 15 years. High young dependency ratio 37.2% 2015, median age 24.2 years low.
Technological advancements actively investigated by Gov. Partnered to investigate uses, develop strategy. Specialist 2010 gathered feedback, low current use, areas of interest. Assessing broadband connectivity, knowledge-based economy goal, tech hand-in-hand traditional methods, small industries.
Fiber optic links to Suva planned 2012, regional agency assist to mitigate wireless drawbacks. Submarine cable install early 2012 plan change internet cost availability. Tech offers opportunities, brings pressures. ICT cyber infra applications opening up. Gov services, business, community, family changes. Opportunities, dangers, awareness, education, training needed. Goal: faster communication, reduced costs, improved delivery, citizen participation relations, equipped with material schedule, capacity building, offshore resources for training awareness on cyber issues seen as necessary.
Cultural events and festivals continue highlighting rich heritage oral traditions. Singing, dancing once hours, long evenings only, shared role with nearby islands, clapping music, storytelling dances. But sources note modernization takes toll, traditions sometimes seem less important, passive entertainment via gadgets versus active participation.
Because of this, preservation efforts vital, overdue. Many songs dances near extinction, recording urgent. Compilation written down, codified, first of its kind, to maintain heritage. Cultural events aimed at this, highlighted yearly via Tuvalu Cultural Roundtable Conference, invited diplomats, etc.
These cultural events seen as nurseries for growing generations. Language culture, tropical vegetation, fish, coral, infra suggest continued dev possible as sovereign state. UTC +12. Recognition in orgs, HDR, PIF, UN, raising sovereignty issues. Environmental displacement problem, culture inscription, UNESCO.
Local customary governance presents another fascinating blend. Different dialects, each island boasts local customary systems, uniting family and clan. Land maritime disputes often settled by traditional elders, Tukufa, to restore harmony. This assurance prerequisite for sovereignty constitution.
What's unique, central government court endorses Tukufa verdicts, making them binding, forcible in formal legal system. Contrasts with other customary systems based purely on traditions and customs can expel member but lack formal legal backing. This hybrid system is key characteristic.
National Day celebrations yearly October 1st. Formal independence 1978, preceded by banquet entertainment. Islands gift Gov. Islands prepare performances weeks ahead. Votes prizes. Speeches. Funafuda major islands. Dance athletic events after speeches. Side activities. Games. Food stalls. Preps on all islands. Truly national event. Day of joy, laughter, reunion, friendship.
Message quoted. Be referred to your past, your sun rises from the past, and this must be strong and bright. Powerful statement. Sources note relates to fear of climate change erasing past treasures. Capital Funafuti. Trophy presentations highlight for island performance winners. Island sports included.
In addition to National Day, traditional festivals, major cultural events. Funafuti Tamatelia, August, celebrates culture traditions, promotes unity, exhibitions, artifacts, handicrafts practices, demonstrations, competitions, games, dances, songs, poetry, storytelling. Highlight, traditional boat race, maritime culture. Gather spectators, participants. Gov involved, growing popularity attracts foreign visitors. Postponed 2022, pandemic, set for Aug 2023. Introduced by Gov, effort to revive or retain culture.
Success led to expansion. First international. Timothalea Kiribati, 2018. Pacific Island nations participation, discussion preserving culture heritage, small target group. Similar smaller festivals, outer islands. After Funafuti's success, Gov invited, persuaded host festival every 2 years, capital with foreign aid, Havagon 2013, Ninai 2015. Conscious, concerted efforts to maintain, promote culture internally, externally.
These ongoing cultural events underscore the active efforts to preserve their identity in the face of modern pressures and external threats.
So looking back at this deep dive into the material you've provided, we've journeyed from Tuvalu's ancient geology and Polynesian settlement through the complex, sometimes confusing timeline of European contact and colonial era. Its hard-won independence, rich and persisting culture facing modern pressures, resource-limited economy reliant on outside factors, unique political system blending Western traditional governance.
Right.
And its profound vulnerability to climate change, while also showing those surprising notes of geological resilience in certain areas.
The sources reinforce the idea of Tuvalu as a micronation, needing to think and respond differently to integrate globally. They note the blend of native connections and intelligent flexibility amidst constraints has contributed to it being a peaceful, safe region.
The source's final thoughts on the future seem to center on ongoing preservation development of native culture and successfully embedding integration into world power structures.
And the closing sentiment from the material is quite powerful. Despite significant challenges, historical injustices, Tuvalu has managed to preserve native resources, environment, culture amidst modernization and migration, expresses stance on climate change, coastal culture rise, with what sources describe as justice and peace nobility.
Which brings us back to the core questions raised by these sources and the complex reality they present. Given Tuvalu's deep connection to its land, its oral traditions considered more correct than written history. What does it truly mean for a culture to rely on migration with dignity when its very physical setting, its historical ground zero for knowledge and identity, is predicted to be submerged? How do you pass on that most valued knowledge and identity when the physical historical settings it relies on might just disappear? That's a profound challenge to wrap your head around.